Throughout the course of history, development is made possible by people embracing new technologies that present them new ways of doing something efficiently. By communicating information about these new technologies to the society, we are able to expand our knowledge and develop our views and attitudes on different subjects. Nonetheless, we should recognize that this is not a coincidence, nor is it within our nature. It is with deliberate intent that people accept new ideas. There exist several patterns that explain how and why people embrace new ways. This is where adoption and persuasion models become significant.
Let us start by defining the essential terms related to persuasion and adoption models. First is diffusion, a term used in different fields of study, such as communication and innovation. According to Rogers 2003, diffusion is the process through which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time. In line with this, Watney 2002 defines diffusion as a special type of communication that deals with new ideas. This definition is closely related to that of Rogers, but Watney focuses on the nature of the message communicated in the diffusion process. In chemistry, diffusion is defined as the movement of molecules from an area of high concentration to an area with a lower concentration. This definition is different from the ones provided by Rogers and Watney, as it is specific to the field of chemistry. The movement of molecules in the agar-agar experiment follows the same principle as the third definition of diffusion. In this experiment, the molecules of the substance added to the agar-agar move from an area of high concentration to an area with a lower concentration, until the concentration of the substance is equal throughout the medium. This process is a fundamental aspect of the agar-agar experiment and is essential in understanding how substances diffuse through mediums in various scientific fields.
Moving on to the second term, innovation. Innovation is a term that is commonly used in various fields of study, including business, technology, and social sciences. According to Rogers, innovation refers to an idea, practice, or project that is perceived as new by an individual or other unit of adoption. In his definition, Roger emphasizes the importance of perception and adoption of new ideas in the innovation process. On the other hand, Nesta 2012 defines innovation as a process by which new ideas turn into practical value in the world. This definition highlights the importance of translating new ideas into practical value that can be implemented and utilized in the real world. In relation to this, DeVeris et al. 2014 defines innovation as the introduction of new elements into a service, including new knowledge, new organization, and new management skills. This definition focuses on the impact of innovation on services and highlights the importance of introducing new elements to improve the quality of services provided. One example for practice is telemedicine, which makes it possible for patients to conduct online consultations with their doctors. On the other hand, examples for objects include electric cars, wind turbines, medical drones, and biodegradable plastics.
Our third and last essential term is adoption. According to Rogers 2003, adoption refers to the full use of an innovation. In his definition, Rogers emphasizes the importance of individuals fully utilizing and integrating innovations into their lives. Lau and Hooper 2009 also define adoption, calling it the understanding and acceptance of a concept with an implied eventual positive outcome in mind. This definition highlights the importance of individuals having a positive attitude towards the adoption of innovations and the potential benefits that can be derived from their use. As per Straub 2009, adoption refers to the integration of a new innovation into an individual's life. This definition emphasizes the importance of an individual incorporating a new innovation into their daily routine and adjusting their behavior accordingly.
One of the most influential books on how innovations are spread throughout society is entitled Diffusion of Innovation, authored by Professor Everett Rogers, a distinguished professor emeritus in the Department of Communication and Journalism at the University of Mexico. Rogers was born in Carroll, Iowa in 1931 and attended Iowa State University for his bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees. Rogers' research focused on the diffusion of new ideas and technologies, and he developed a theoretical framework to explain how innovation spread through social systems. The book was first published in 1962 and has since become a classic in the field of communication and sociology. Rogers' contributions to the field of communication and sociology continue to be studied and celebrated up to this date, and his book entitled Diffusion of Innovations remains a seminal piece in the field.
Rogers' IATA model, which stands for Awareness, Interest, Evaluation, Trial, and Adoption, was first published in his book Diffusion of Innovations in 1962. However, it was only in the later book, Communication of Innovations, A Cross-Cultural Approach by Rogers and Shoemaker in 1971 that we were able to find a detailed explanation of the model. The IATA model is based on the traditional view of the innovation decision process, which was postulated by a committee of rural sociologists in 1955. Diffusion scholars have long recognized that an individual's decision about an innovation is not an instantaneous act, but rather it is a process that occurs over a period of time and consists of a series of actions. The five-stage adoption process proposed by Rogers was primarily based on theoretical reasoning, as empirical evidence was not available until the late 1950s from studies conducted by Beal and others in 1957 and Kopp and others in 1958.
Before we proceed, let us first elaborate on what the IATA model is. According to Rogers and Shoemaker in their book published in 1971, the IATA model has two definitions. Their first definition referred to the IATA model as a traditional view of the innovation decision process. This means that it describes the series of actions that individuals go through when deciding whether or not to adapt an innovation. On the other hand, the second definition states that the IATA model is the adoption process itself. This means that it refers to the process of how an individual actually adapts an innovation. Now let us move on to the 5 stages of the IATA model. The first stage is more commonly known as the awareness stage, where the individual becomes aware of the existence of the innovation but lacks information about it. This is a mental stage where the individual is trying to understand what the innovation is and how it works. The second stage is the interest stage, where the individual develops interest in the innovation and seeks additional information about it. This is an emotional stage where the individual becomes curious and starts to learn more about the innovation. Next, the third stage is called the evaluation stage, where the individual makes a mental application of the new idea to their present and anticipated future situation and decides whether or not to give it a try. This is a behavioral stage where the individual is trying to determine if the innovation is a good fit for their needs. Following this is the fourth stage, known as the trial stage. This is where the individual actually applies the new idea on a small scale in order to determine its utility in their own situation. This is also known as a behavioral stage, where the individual is testing the innovation and seeing how it works in their own life. Now, the fifth and final stage is called the adoption stage, where the individual uses the new idea continuously on a full scale. This is the ultimate behavioral stage where the individual has fully integrated the innovation into their life and is using it regularly.
In order for us to further understand the IATA model, here is an example using the post-exposure prophylaxis or PEP. Post-exposure prophylaxis, according to Bigman 2014, is an HIV prevention strategy designed to protect a person after possible exposure to HIV infection. In order for the treatment to be effective, HIV.gov reported that PEP should be taken within 72 hours for the next 28 days upon possible exposure to HIV infection. Post-exposure prophylaxis as an innovation can be an example for the adoption process. For instance, the awareness stage begins as a man discovers PEP while surfing the internet to look for countermeasures after an HIV scare. Upon encountering the product, his curiosity was piqued and he decided to conduct a more in-depth inquiry on the product by visiting the doctor. This starts the interest stage. As the man proceeds to analyze the contents and contemplate on whether it is his best option, the evaluation stage takes place. After this, the man now goes to buy a pack of PEP to try it, thus initiating the trial stage. Finally, after conducting a trial to find out the effectiveness of the product, the man eventually decided to adopt PEP by using it after every possible exposure to HIV after engaging in sexual intercourse.
According to Rogers and Shoemaker's book, there are some issues and limitations with the adoption process. One such limitation is that the process implies that it always ends in adoption decisions, whereas in reality, rejection may likely be an outcome. Therefore, a more general term than the adoption process is needed that allows for either adoption or rejection. Second, the 5 stages of the adoption process do not always occur in the specified order, and some stages may be skipped, especially the trial stage. Evaluation occurs throughout the process rather than just one of the 5 stages. Third, the process seldom ends with adoption, as further information seeking may occur to confirm or reinforce the decision, or the individual may later switch from adoption to rejection, resulting in a discontinuance. These limitations should be taken into account when considering the adoption process.
Moving on to our second adoption model, the Rogers Innovation Decision Process. According to Rogers in his book The Fusion of Innovations, the concept of stages in an innovation decision process was first introduced by rural sociologists Ryan and Gross in the Iowa seed corn study of 1943. While their stages were not exactly the same as the 5 stages used by most diffusion scholars today, they understood that farmers did not make impulsive decisions to adopt new seed corn. Instead, they learned about the new idea from certain sources or channels of communication, sought further information, tried out the new seed on a few acres of corn, and finally, several years later, adopted the innovation completely. This understanding of the process has been supported by most diffusion researchers who have examined the innovation decision process for their respondents and have arrived at a somewhat similar set of stages. This model was drawn from Rogers' 2003 book, Diffusion of Innovations, 5th edition.
The innovation decision process refers to a broad terminology that encompasses the various stages of decision making when considering the adoption or rejection of an innovation. This definition was given by Rogers and Shoemaker in 1971. Another definition of the innovation decision process is that it involves an information seeking and information processing activity, as described by Rogers in 2003. Now, the innovation decision process is the revised version of the IATA model. It was designed to account for the limitations and major criticisms raised about the previous model. The innovation decision process was first introduced in 1971 in the second edition of Rogers' book, The Fusion of Innovations, and was modified further in the book's 5th edition in 2003. This report will specifically employ the 2003 model of the innovation decision process. The innovation decision process is composed of 5 stages that individuals or other decision-making units typically go through. This will be further explained by my groupmate Erica.
The first stage is knowledge, where the individual learns about the innovation and understands how it works. The second stage is persuasion, where the individual forms an opinion, whether favorable or unfavorable, about the innovation. The third stage is decision, where the individual engages in activities that lead to a choice to either adopt or reject the innovation. The fourth stage is implementation, where the individual puts the new idea into use. Finally, the fifth stage is confirmation, where the individual seeks reinforcement of their previous innovation decision but may reverse if it is exposed to conflicting message about the innovation.
In this example, we can see the innovation decision process being applied to the use of PEP as a countermeasure against HIV. The process consists of 5 stages, which are knowledge, persuasion, decision, implementation, and confirmation. Knowledge involves the discovery of the innovation, in this case PEP, and an analysis of why and how it is used. The individual in this example learned about PEP and conducted research on its effectiveness in preventing HIV. In the persuasion stage, the individual was convinced that PEP could be an efficient countermeasure against HIV upon inquiry. This stage involves seeking information and opinions about the innovation from others and evaluating it to make a decision. The decision stage involves making a choice to adopt or reject the innovation. In this case, the individual decided to use PEP as a countermeasure against HIV. The implementation stage involves putting the decision into action. The individual used PEP after a possible HIV exposure, which is the purpose for which it was intended. Finally, during confirmation, the individual evaluated the effectiveness of PEP after using it for several months. After experiencing some side effects, he decided to stop using it. This example shows how the innovation decision process can be applied to the adoption of an innovation like PEP. By going through each of the 5 stages, the individual was able to evaluate the innovation and make an informed decision about its use.
Let us now proceed to the comparison between the IATA model and the innovation decision process. Given that the two models were developed by the same author, and that the innovation decision process is straight up a revision of the IATA model, there is bound to be some resemblance between the two. Let us first analyze their structure. Components of the IATA model have their counterparts in the innovation decision process. The awareness stage in the IATA model can be likened to the knowledge stage of the innovation decision process because they both involve informing the audience of the innovation. IATA's interest stage is to innovation decision process persuasion. In these stages, the audience develops a specific attitude towards the innovation.
Moving on, IATA's evaluation stage is similar to the decision stage of the innovation decision process. These stages are both where the audience makes the choice of either adopting or rejecting the innovation. The IATA model's trial and adoption stages are incorporated into the innovation decision process's implementation stage. They may be slightly different in the sense that the IATA model provides the distinction of applying the innovation in a small or full-scale setting. These 3 stages are the same in that they all involve the application and utilization of the innovation. Finally, the IATA model has no counterpart for the confirmation stage of the innovation decision process. In this stage, the audience is given the chance to retract or change their initial decision of either adopting or rejecting the innovation. This stage served as a response to the criticisms and limitations pointed out on the IATA model. Through this stage, it is implied that the process of adopting an innovation can lead to rejection as well, and that an initial disposition on the innovation can be reversed or changed.
In this part, we will analyze the similarities and differences between the IATA model and the innovation decision process. Some common characteristics between the two models are their proponents and the book they were published. These two models, published in the book Diffusion of Innovations by Everett Rogers, both aim to identify the process on how individuals or a collective body adopt new innovations. Consequently, both models also highlight the significance of decision-making in the adoption process. Moving on, clear differences can also be seen between them. While the two models both consist of 5 stages, they assume different endings. The last 2 stages of the IATA model involves trying the innovation on a small scale first, then eventually using it on a full scale. However, the innovation decision process allows the individual to apply the innovation first, either small scale or full scale, then seek reinforcement regarding the efficiency of the innovation. In this way, The innovation decision process allows the individual to retract their initial decision to adopt the innovation and they can reject it instead. While the IETA model was published in 1962, the innovation decision process first appeared in Rogers' book in 1971. It was then revised in the fifth edition of Rogers' book in 2003. Lastly, the IETA model revolves around the idea that the process will definitely end in adoption. The innovation decision process, on the other hand, highlights the recipient's capability to choose between adopting or rejecting the innovation.
The next adoption model to be tackled in this discussion is the CAP model. The acronym CAP stands for Knowledge, Attitude, and Practice, and it is often used in public health research and interventions to assess individuals' understanding, beliefs, and behaviors related to a particular health issue. By gathering data on CAP, researchers can design targeted interventions to improve health outcomes and promote behavior change. The CAP model has been used extensively in various fields, including health, education, and social sciences. There are two definitions of the CAP model given. Dumont 2012 defined the CAP model as a quantitative type survey that provides access to quantitative and qualitative information. On the other hand, the second definition of the CAP model is a tool to investigate what is known, believed, and done by participants in a specific topic as defined by Siltracul in 2012.
There are three key components that make up this model: knowledge, attitude, and practices. Knowledge is defined as a set of understandings and acquired skills, as well as one's capacity for imagining and perceiving. Attitude, on the other hand, is a way of being or a position that can help explain why a subject adopts a certain practice over another. Practices, also known as behaviors, are the observable actions of an individual in response to a stimulus. Understanding these definitions will provide a solid foundation for comprehending the CAP model and its purpose.
The CAP model highlights two ways in which the knowledge can lead to practice. The first is a direct route from knowledge to practice. The CAP model is helpful in identifying the behavior of people in relation to a certain subject. In this case, post-exposure prophylaxis can be considered a great example for one of the two methods for CAP, the direct route from knowledge to practice. Now, for knowledge, a sex worker is expected to be well versed on discussions involving their reproductive health. This includes knowledge on contraceptives and countermeasures for STDs like HIV. Practice. Countries like China and Thailand require sex workers to undergo HIV testing. If found positive, they are also required to undergo treatment. Considering this, a sex worker in these countries, for instance, will be compelled to use PEP and other related products in fear of facing penalties for noncompliance. In this example, the fact that the attitude stage of the CAP model can be bypassed is shown. The knowledge and information that a sex worker has acquired regarding PEP is enough for them to establish their own opinion or attitude regarding the product. However, since they are required to use it, attitude does not become a factor influencing the person's behavior or practice.
The second route involves knowledge passing through attitude first before leading to practice. Example for knowledge, attitude, practice. The CAP model can be used to understand how individuals respond to new health interventions such as PEP or post-exposure prophylaxis for HIV. Let's consider an example. So for knowledge, a person learns about PEP for the first time from a healthcare provider or a trusted source of information. They may gain knowledge about the benefits of PEP, how to access it, and when it should be taken. For the attitude, the person may initially feel hesitant to use PEP due to concerns about potential side effects or the cost of the treatment. They may also hold beliefs about HIV that could influence their attitude towards PEP, such as feeling that they are not at risk for HIV or that they do not need to take medication because HIV is no longer a death sentence. For the practice, if the person is exposed to HIV, They may not seek about PEP due to a lack of access or knowledge of the treatment. They may also face other barriers such as stigma, fear, or a lack of trust in the healthcare system. In this example, the COP model shows that knowledge alone is not enough to drive behavior change. Attitude and practice are also key factors that need to be addressed to increase uptake of PEP. To improve PEP uptake, interventions may need to focus on addressing attitudes and beliefs that may prevent individuals from using PEP, as well as improving access and reducing barriers to care.
Now, let us proceed to the comparison between the IETA model and the CAP model. The IETA model and the CAP model are two well-known frameworks used to understand the process of change and the adoption of new ideas, technologies, or practices. Let's take a closer look at the two models and compare them. In terms of stage, IETA's awareness stage is similar to the CAP model's knowledge stage. IETA's interest and evaluation stages are incorporated into the CAP model's attitude stage. And finally, the trial and adoption stage from the IETA model are counterparts of the CAP model's practice stage. In the IETA model, there are 5 stages: awareness, interest, evaluation, trial, and adoption. The model is dynamic, meaning that individuals can move back and forth between stages before adopting an innovation. It also narrows down the phases into a linear progression, making it easier to understand the adoption process.
On the other hand, the CAP model consists of 3 elements: knowledge, attitudes, and practices. It aims to explain how individuals' attitudes and practices are influenced by their knowledge. The model also narrows down the variables involved in behavior change, making it easier to comprehend the process. The IETA model was developed by Everett M. Rogers and is often used in the fusion of innovation research. The CAP model, on the other hand, is not currently attributed to a particular group or person. Nonetheless, both models are useful in understanding how individuals adopt new ideas or innovations, and which factors influence this process. Understanding these frameworks can be helpful in designing effective strategies for promoting and diffusing new ideas.
Our next model is the theory of planned behavior, or TPB, which proposes that behavioral intentions are the primary determinant of planned behaviors and that these intentions are largely influenced by an individual's attitude toward the behavior, the subjective norms surrounding the behavior, and the individual's perceived control over the behavior. The TPB is a widely used framework in social psychology and is designed to predict and explain human behaviors in specific situations, according to Adzen, 1991. Also, according to Isaac Adzen, the proponent of this model, an individual's behavior intentions are influenced by their attitude toward the behavior, which reflects their positive or negative evaluation of performing the behavior. Subjective norms, which refer to the social pressure or influence that individuals perceive from others to engage or not engage in a behavior, and perceived behavioral control, which reflects an individual's perception of their ability to perform the behavior under different circumstances.
Isaac Eisen, who is attributed for the development of the TPB model, is a social psychologist and professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He received his PhD in social psychology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. According to Eisen's original formulation of the TPB in 1991, an individual's behavior is primarily determined by their intentions towards that behavior.
According to Asgen 1991, intention is defined as the degree to which a person is willing to exert effort to perform a specific behavior and is a key determinant of actual behavior. On the other hand, Bandura 1997 described intentions as proximal goals, which are smaller, short-term objectives that, when attained, might pave the way for the achievement of more significant long-term objectives. By behavior, we mean anything an organism does as defined by Davis 1996. Another definition provided by the APA Dictionary describes behavior as an organism's activities in response to external and internal stimuli. The TPB model proposes that an individual's behavioral intentions, which are influenced by their attitude toward the behavior, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control, are the primary determinant of their actual behavior. The stronger the intention to engage in a behavior, the more likely it is that the individual will perform that behavior.
There are three conceptually independent determinants of intention: the individual's attitude towards the behavior, their subjective norms or perception of social pressure to perform the behavior, and their perceived behavioral control or confidence in their ability to perform the behavior. These three factors work together to shape an individual's intention to perform a behavior, and therefore their likelihood of actually engaging in that behavior. Attitude toward behavior is a key component of the theory of planned behavior. It refers to the individual's overall evaluation or appraisal of a particular behavior. This evaluation can be either favorable or unfavorable, and can strongly influence the individual's intention to engage in that behavior. In other words, if an individual has a positive attitude towards a behavior, they are more likely to intend to engage in that behavior. On the other hand, if an individual has a negative attitude toward the behavior, they are less likely to intend to engage in that behavior. Therefore, understanding an individual's attitude toward the behavior can be critical in predicting and influencing their behavior.
Subjective norms in the theory of planned behavior refers to the perceived social pressure or influence from significant others to either perform or not perform a particular behavior. The social pressure can come from a variety of sources, such as family, friends, peers, and other influential people in an individual's life. The subjective norm can be influenced by factors such as cultural norms, societal expectations, and personal beliefs about what is acceptable or desirable behavior. The subjective norms are an important component of the TPB because it reflects the social context in which the behavior occurs and can strongly influence an individual's behavioral intentions. Perceived behavioral control refers to an individual's belief about the ease or difficulty of performing a particular behavior. It is assumed to reflect past experiences as well as anticipated impediments and obstacles. Perceived behavioral control encompasses factors such as the person's perceived ability to perform the behavior and the resources available to them to facilitate the behavior. The greater the perceived control over the behavior, the more likely an individual is to engage in that behavior. Conversely, if an individual perceives a lack of control over the behavior, they are less likely to engage in it. Perceived behavioral control is a key component of the theory of planned behavior and plays a crucial role in predicting and explaining human behavior in specific situations.
Example for TPB. According to the TPB model, an individual's behavior is influenced by their attitude toward the behavior, subjective norm, and perceived behavioral control. Let's apply this model to the example of using PEP after a potential HIV exposure. Attitude toward behavior. In this case, the person has a positive attitude toward using PEP because they believe it can effectively prevent infection after a potential exposure. They recognize the potential benefits of using PEP and feel that it is worth the effort and potential side effects. For the subjective norm, the person's friends or family members encourage them to use PEP after a potential exposure. This support from others strengthens their intention to use PEP and makes them more likely to follow through with the behavior.
Perceived behavioral control. The person has easy access to PEP and feels confident in their ability to obtain and use it effectively. They have the necessary knowledge and resources to use PEP, which increases their likelihood of using it. Intentions. Based on their positive attitude towards using PEP and the support from their social network, the person intends to use PEP after a potential exposure. They believe it is the best way to prevent infection and are committed to taking the necessary steps to protect themselves. Behavior. The person who intends to use PEP after a potential exposure seeks out and obtains the treatment and follows the recommended treatment regimen to completion. They take responsibility for their health and make informed decisions about their behavior. Overall, this example demonstrates how the TPB model can be applied to understand the factors that influence an individual's decision to use PEP after a potential HIV exposure.
At this point, we will now compare the IATA model and the TPB model. The IATA model and the TPB model are two popular frameworks used in psychology and education to understand and predict behavior. While both models share similarities, they differ in their structure and approach. The IATA model is a linear and sequential model that consists of 5 stages, which include awareness, interest, evaluation, trial, and adoption. It provides a structured approach to understanding how individuals move from being unaware of a new idea to adopting it.
In contrast, the TPB model is a complex interaction model that consists of 5 constructs, including attitude, subjective norms, perceived, behavioral control, intention, and behavior. It provides a more comprehensive understanding of how various factors interact to influence behavior change. While both models aim to explain behavior change, the IATA model is more focused on adoption, while the TPB model is more focused on the behavior. The IATA model provides a step-by-step approach to adoption, while the TPB model considers various factors that may influence behavioral change. In terms of proponents, the IATA model was developed by Everett M. Rogers, a communications scholar who is widely recognized as a founder of diffusion of innovations theory. The TPB model, on the other hand, was developed by Isaac Adson, a social psychologist who has made significant contributions to the field of social psychology and behavior change research.
The next adoption model that will be tackled is also published in Everett Rogers' Diffusion of Innovation, the Rogers Adoption Curve. As described by Rogers in 2003, the adoption curve is based on the concept of innovativeness, which refers to the degree to which an individual or group is relatively earlier in adopting new ideas compared to others in their social system. The adopter categories are based on the persistence of innovativeness and are characterized by 2 parameters of a normal distribution, the mean and the standard deviation. These categories include innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards, and are distributed in a normal distribution curve over time. However, one limitation of this method of adopter classification is that not all individuals or groups may fully adopt the new idea or innovation. In the Rogers adoption curve, the x-axis represents the time it takes for all individuals of a social system to adopt an innovation. The y-axis, on the other hand, represents frequency or the population that have adopted the innovation. The curve is used to illustrate the adoption and diffusion of new ideas or innovations over time within a social system.
In the context of Rogers' adoption curve, normal distribution, which was used as a metaphor for this model, refers to the statistical pattern in which the distribution of adopters of an innovation tends to follow a bell-shaped curve over time. This means that the majority of adopters tend to fall in the middle of the curve, with a smaller number of early adopters at the beginning and a smaller number of late adopters at the end. The normal distribution is characterized by a symmetrical distribution of data points around a central mean value, with the majority of the data points falling within 1 or 2 standard deviations from the mean.
As mentioned earlier, Rogers identified the adoption curve as a categorization of adopters based on their innovativeness in accepting new ideas or products. Another definition of the adoption curve is to divide consumers into segments based on their willingness to try out a new innovation. This definition was proposed by Ganti in 2020. In this model, consumers are categorized as innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards, based on their readiness to adopt a new product or idea.
The theory of diffusion of innovations identifies 5 adapter categories that serve as ideal types based on the degree of innovativeness exhibited by individuals. The first adapter category is called innovators. Innovators, which comprises of 2.5% of the adoption population, are characterized as venturesome, with a strong interest in new ideas that lead them to seek out more diverse and cosmopolitan social networks beyond their immediate peer groups. To successfully adopt an innovation, innovators must have the ability to understand and apply complex technical knowledge as well as the willingness to cope with a high degree of uncertainty at the time of adoption. Venturesomeness is a salient value for the innovator, reflecting a desire for risk taking and daring behavior. Despite the possibility of occasional setbacks, the innovator plays a critical role in the diffusion process, as they often introduce new ideas from outside of the system's boundaries and serve as the gatekeepers for the flow of new ideas into the system.
The early adopter category in the adoption curve is composed of individuals who are more integrated into their local social systems than innovators. Early adopters hold 13.5% of the adoption population. This category holds the highest degree of opinion leadership in most social systems, making them the go-to individuals to consult before adopting a new idea. Early adopters are respected by their peers due to their successful and discreet use of new ideas. Their adoption of a new innovation decreases uncertainty and helps to convey a subjective evaluation of the innovation to near peers through interpersonal networks.
The early majority are those who adopt new ideas just before the average member of a system. Their position between the early adopters and the late majority makes them an important link in the diffusion process as they help connect the early adopters with the rest of the system. The early majority represents a significant portion of the adopter categories, comprising 34% of the adoption population. They are cautious in their decision-making process, often taking the time to deliberate before fully adopting a new idea. Their innovation decision period is also longer compared to that of innovators and early adopters. As a result, while they are willing to follow and adopt innovations, they seldom lead in the diffusion process.
The late majority adopt new ideas just after the average member of a system. They tend to be more cautious and skeptical about new innovations, and are motivated to adopt primarily by economic necessity or social pressure. They also make up 34% of the adoption population, and their adoption decisions are influenced heavily by the experiences and the opinions of others in their social network. The late majority approaches innovation with a skeptical and cautious air, and they do not adopt until most others in their system have already done so. This means that innovations have often become well established and proven before the late majority are willing to adopt them. Their relatively scarce resources mean that most of the uncertainty about a new idea must be removed before the late majority feel that it is safe to adopt. Once they do adopt, it is often because they perceive that the innovation has become a necessary or expected part of their social or economic environment.
The last adopter category in the adoption curve are called the laggards. Comprising 16% of the adoption population, laggards are a unique group in the diffusion of innovation process, as they are the last to adopt an innovation in a social system. They have almost no opinion leadership and tend to look to the past as their point of reference. Their decisions are often based on what has been done previously, and they associate primarily with others who have traditional values.
Laggards are skeptical of innovations and change agents. Their decision-making process is lengthy, with adoption and use lagging far behind awareness and knowledge of a new idea. They tend to resist new ideas as their resources are limited, and they need to be sure that a new idea will not fail before they adopt it. Their precarious economic situation forces them to be extremely cautious in adopting innovations. However, it is not their fault that they are relatively late to adopt. The system blame may more accurately describe their situation. In conclusion, laggards play an important role in the diffusion of innovation process. They serve as a reminder of the values and traditions of the past and help ensure the innovations are thoroughly tested and proven before widespread adoption.
The adoption curve model describes how new products or ideas are adopted by different groups of people over time. In the case of PEP, we can apply this model to better understand the different adopter categories for these HIV prevention methods. First, we have the innovators who are the first to adopt new and innovative treatments. For PEP, this could be an individual who seeks out and uses PEP promptly after a potential exposure due to their interest in new and cutting-edge treatments.
Next, we have the early adopters, who are typically healthcare providers that are knowledgeable about PEP and encourage their patients to use it after a potential exposure. These providers are willing to take risks with new treatments and are often influential in spreading the word about their effectiveness. The early majority are individuals who start using PEP after hearing positive experiences from friends or family members who have used it successfully. This group is more risk-averse than the early adopters and need more social proof before they will try something new.
In this instance, the late majority are individuals who only seek out PEP after hearing positive reports about it in media or from healthcare providers. This group is even more skeptical of new treatments and is usually motivated to adopt them out of necessity rather than desire to be innovative. Finally, we have the laggards, who are hesitant to use PEP due to stigma or misconceptions surrounding HIV or other diseases. This group is resistant to change and may not adopt PEP until it becomes more mainstream or socially acceptable. By understanding these adopter categories, healthcare providers and public health campaigns can tailor their messaging and outreach efforts to each group to increase the adoption of PEP and ultimately reduce the spread of HIV.
Now that we have completely tackled adoption models, let us now proceed to persuasion models. Defining persuasion, Simon's 1976 says that it is the act of making someone do or believe something by giving them a good reason to do so. In line with this, Perloff 2003 called it as a symbol process in which communicators try to convince other people to change their attitudes or behavior regarding an issue through the transmission of a message. Through these definitions, we can conclude that persuasion involves the use of communication to move others to change their opinion and beliefs, sometimes to generate a course of action in response to a specific issue.
One example of a persuasion model is Karl Hovland's order of presentation model. There was no specific model for this when Hovland published the book. Instead, this model was introduced as part of the Hovland-Yale model of persuasion in a series of publications based on Hovland's book by Hovland himself and his colleagues in the Yale University in the 1950s and 1960s. Based on the Hovland-Yale model of persuasion, there are three independent variables responsible for observable communication effects, namely source factors, message factors, and audience factors. Source factors are concerned with the speaker's competence and credibility, while audience factors are concerned with the audience characteristics that affect how they take in the message. As a result, the speaker has no power over the source and audience factors, leaving only the message factors for them to control. This is where Hovland's order of presentation comes in.
Hovland's order of presentation model is incorporated within the message factors. This is under the control of the speaker, because it is concerned with how the message or arguments are delivered. Specifically, it is concerned with the order of arguments, one-sided and two-sided messages or arguments, types of appeal, and explicit or implicit conclusion. But before we go into detail with each, let us first define Hovland's order of presentation model. Swanson 1958 defines order of presentation as the effects produced on opinions and attitudes by the sequence in which the information is presented. Haas 2016 added to this as to how the effectiveness of persuasive communication could be optimized. Simply put, Hovland's order of presentation model emphasizes the role that the order of arguments has upon an audience.
The order of presentation model was first introduced in a book entitled The Order of Presentation and Persuasion, published by Hovland and his colleagues in the Yale University in 1957. As mentioned earlier, the model itself did not exist yet when this book was published. Hovland and his colleagues, through this book, just conceptualized it and focused on describing the role that the order of presentation of arguments has in influencing the effectiveness of a communication. Later on, Hovland and his associates, in cooperation with the Yale Communication Research Program, incorporated the contents of this book and the formation of the Hovland-Yale model of persuasion.
Carl Ivor Hovland was the main proponent of this model. Born in 1912, Carl Hovland is an American psychologist who spent his entire academic career as a faculty of Yale University. Hovland also worked for the U.S. Army during the Second World War as a consultant, and he also helped in the evaluation of military training programs. Ultimately, he was tasked to oversee research that analyzed audience resistance to persuasive communication and highlighted methods for overcoming such resistance.
The first component under the message factors, and consequently Hovland's order of presentation model, is the order of arguments. In order to tackle this component, we have to first establish what primacy and recency are. According to MacLeod 2023, primacy refers to the tendency to recall earlier words, while recency refers to the tendency to remember words that come after. With these two concepts in mind, let us now move on to the significance of the order of arguments in communication.
Based on Hovland and his team's findings in the book The Order of Presentation in Persuasion, a primacy effect is entailed if a response indicating one's opinion is expressed after hearing only the first side of the issue. The authors found out that the public expression of opinion tended to freeze the subject's views and to make them resistant to influence by the second side of the issue. This primacy effect can also be seen in real life often. In everyday life, the greater effectiveness of the first side of an issue may sometimes be attributable to this mechanism. Since an individual often makes decisions after hearing only one side of an issue and then carries out a series of acts on the basis of his decisions. When this happens, changing the person's opinion by presenting the second side of the issue becomes a great challenge.
Hovland's findings also show that when two sides of an issue are presented successively by different communicators, the side presented first does not necessarily have the advantage. Hovland and his team conducted an experiment wherein communications successively advocating first one and then the other side of an issue were presented to the subjects to read. Results indicated that only one of the three groups showed a greater effectiveness for the side presented first, entailing a primacy effect, while two groups showed the second side to be slightly more effective, thus entailing a recency effect. 3 of 4 additional groups gave evidence that the second communication produced slightly more opinion change than the first, which also shows a recency effect.
By analyzing Hovland's findings, we can conclude that the order of arguments can entail either a primacy or a recency effect. This means that depending on how and to whom the message could be communicated, there can be two outcomes. First, the side of the argument communicated first can produce more opinion and behavior change than the side communicated after that. Or second, the side or the argument communicated second or more recently can stick to the audience, influencing their behavior and attitude towards the issue at hand. Normally, especially among people who tend to have a hard time focusing on the speaker for an extensive period, it becomes easier to remember what has just been said recently than to remember what was first said by the speaker in the earlier part of the communication process.
Moving on to the second element of the order of presentation model, one-sided and two-sided messages. One-sided messages involve tackling only one side to an issue, meaning either pros or cons. On the other hand, The two-sided message integrates both the positive and negative side in the communication. This means that the speaker can choose to communicate either pros first, then the cons second, or vice versa. The cons first, then the pros second.
When it comes to communicating either one-sided or two-sided messages, Hovland says that a pro-first order is superior to a con-first order. When an authoritative communicator plans to mention pro-arguments and also non-salient con arguments. Hovland pointed out that, at the onset, the audience are favorably disposed towards the speaker and are motivated to accept his messages, because the opposing arguments are considered non-salient or negligible. Hearing the pro-arguments first heightens the chance for the audience to accept the message, to the point where later con arguments can be accepted without causing the audience to reverse their initially favorable position. On the other hand, Hovland also indicated that if con or negative arguments are given at the onset of the communication process, the audience tend to develop an avoidance tendency, making it harder to reverse their positions or opinions regarding the matter at hand, even after the pro or positive arguments are communicated.
The third element of the order of presentation model is the type of appeal. As defined by IGI Global, an appeal refers to communication strategies used to grab attention and persuade people. While there are different methods to appeal to one audience, here are some examples. The first one is pathos, the appeal to emotions. An effective way to grab the audience's attention is to identify with them. An audience is more receptive to being persuaded by someone they can relate to. Pathos can be utilized by using simple and meaningful language, emotional tone, pauses, and emotional metaphors, among others. Next, we got logos, also known as appeal to logic. This type of appeal is concerned with the use of reason and facts. Effective arguments utilizing logos should contain logical arguments, recorded evidence, historical data, factual information, and literal analogies. Our last example is ethos, or the appeal to ethics. This refers to the effort to establish the speaker's credibility and character in a simpler sense, before a speaker can convince the reader to accept the message. The audience should accept and trust the speaker. This can be done by using appropriate language and vocabulary, paying attention to one's presence, maybe through one's movement or attire, and documenting the areas of expertise.
As stated in Hovland's book, placing communications highly desirable to the recipient first, followed by those less desirable, produces more opinion change than the reverse order. Results from the experiment conducted by Hovland's team showed that the communicator elicited more total agreement from his audience when he presented the conclusions consonant with their desires first and the undesirable ones later. He interprets his results to mean that receiving the earlier undesirable messages results in the recipients acquiring habits interfering with the learning of latter messages by the same source with consequent reduced persuasive effect, whereas when the earlier messages from a source have desirable contents, the recipient acquires habits resulting in better learning of that source's latter messages, thereby augmenting their persuasiveness.
The last component of Hovland's order of presentation model consists of explicit and implicit conclusions. According to Quinn's New York English Society, explicit messages refer to those that are made clear and stated clearly, while implicit messages are the opposite, implied but not stated clearly. A study conducted by Tubbs in 1968 revealed that regardless of the audience's degree of commitment, the explicit conclusion was more effective in eliciting attitude change. This result is also in line with the findings of a study conducted by Hovland and Mandel in 1952. Results also showed that if the members of the audience were intelligent and if the speech were to be organized clearly, the type of conclusion made little difference.
Consequently, Hovland's findings also showed that order of presentation is a more significant factor in influencing opinion for subjects with relatively weak desire for understanding. than for those with high cognitive need. More specifically, those with low cognitive needs were positively affected if they received the motivating material prior to the informational communication, and negatively affected if they received the two parts in reversed order. Persons with a high cognitive need, on the other hand, accept the solution, whether it was presented before or after the problem was raised.
The order of presentation model, proposed by Hovland, suggests that the order in which information is presented can have a significant amount on the effectiveness of persuasion in the context of discussing PEP with a patient. A healthcare provider may choose to present the benefits of PEP first before discussing the potential side effects or risks. This approach is aimed at emphasizing the benefits of PEP and may result in the patient focusing solely on the information presented first due to the primacy bias.
Alternatively, an organization promoting PEP may use a one-sided argument that presents only the benefits of PEP without discussing any potential risks or drawbacks. This approach is aimed at encouraging people to use PEP by highlighting its positive attributes. However, a two-sided argument that presents both the benefits and risks of PEP can provide a more balanced perspective.
The type of appeal used to encourage someone who has been potentially exposed to HIV to seek PEP can also impact the effectiveness of persuasion. An emotional appeal could be used to highlight the potential consequences of not using PEP, such as the risk of contracting HIV. This approach is aimed at creating a sense of urgency and highlighting the importance of taking action. In contrast, a rational appeal could be used to persuade someone by presenting statistics on the effectiveness of PEP in preventing infection.
Finally, the explicit versus implicit conclusion can impact the effectiveness of persuasion. An explicit conclusion could be used by a healthcare provider who would directly recommend PEP as the best course of action after a potential exposure to HIV or other infections. This approach is aimed at providing a clear and direct recommendation. In contrast, an implicit conclusion could be presented in a public health campaign that focuses on the importance of being responsible and protecting oneself and others from infection, without explicitly mentioning PEP as a solution. Overall, the Hovland model provides a framework to help healthcare providers and public health campaigns tailor their message to maximize the effectiveness of their communication. By considering factors such as the order of arguments, the use of a one-sided or two-sided argument, the type of appeal, and the explicit or implicit conclusion, those promoting PEP can create messages that are more likely to persuade people to use it.
In conclusion, there are several adoption and persuasion models that can be used to understand and influence the decision-making process of individuals or groups. Each of these models has its unique approach and perspective towards the process of adoption and persuasion. By examining these, we can gain a deeper understanding of how different individuals or groups approach the adoption of new ideas or behaviors, such as the use of PEP. This knowledge can inform our efforts to target and tailor our outreach strategies to better promote the adoption and utilization of PEP. We must recognize that people hold diverse attitudes and beliefs about PEP, and that effective messaging should address these differences. By using the insights gained from these models, we can work towards improving the adoption and use of PEP as a critical tool in the prevention of HIV and other sexually transmitted infections.
Understanding the various adoption and persuasion models, such as the IATA model, Innovation Decision Model, CAP model, Adoption Curve model, TPB model, and Order of Presentation model, can help organizations and individuals craft more effective outreach and messaging strategies for various products, services, and ideas. By recognizing the different attitudes and beliefs held by individuals and groups, we can tailor our efforts to better persuade and encourage adoption. Utilizing these models can also help us identify key influencers and early adopters, as well as address the concerns of those or may be more hesitant to embrace change. By taking advantage of the insights and strategies offered by these models, we can work towards increasing adoption and acceptance of important innovations. Ideas that benefit individuals and society as a whole will also be implemented and adopted more easily.
To wrap up this presentation, here is a list of the references used for this report. Thank you for listening and have a good day ahead.